Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of our Great Books program that we convene here at Ubiquity University, both for our students and for the general public. We believe in reading. We believe in the great books. We have had this program for many, many years so that once a month we provide, as a community service, a graduate level seminar on one of the great books of the human tradition. Many of them are ancient, some of them are modern. They come from all over the world. They are great because they deal with noble themes. They're appreciated by people across cultures and across time, and they transform lives. And one of the great books of our time, in my view, was written by Dr. John Mack, who was the dean of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School from 1900, 1977 rather, to 2004. And so we want to talk about his great book, Abduction, this month, and then in June when I'll be providing my second lecture. We take 2 months per book. What I generally do is the first lecture, I like to set context and tell the life of the particular author, set the context of his life within the larger framework of what is going on in the world. And then on the second month, I get textual and we dive into the text itself. And so that's what we'll be doing for John Mack and his great work, Abduction, which was an instant classic when it came out in 1994. And it endures to the present day as possibly the definitive book on abductions. Um, uh, John Mack, I had the privilege of knowing John Mack and counting him as a friend. He attended a number of the conferences that I convened back in the 1990s. He had a brilliant intellect. He was deeply empathic. He was fun to be with. He was very funny and had one of the most incisive minds of his time. I want to set the context for John Mack in the following way. He was born in 1929 in New York of a German Jewish family. His father read the Bible to John and his other siblings as a work of great literature. And John flourished and went off to university, got his medical doctor degree in psychiatry. And then, as I mentioned, beginning in 1977, became the dean of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, which at that time, as it would be today, was a very high honor. In the 1980s, he was very involved in the anti-nuclear movement. He was one of the founding members of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War with Dr. Bernard Lown at Harvard, and also Dr. Evgeny Chazov in Moscow, who was a member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. And they brought scientists and physicians together. Dr. Carl Sagan was a member, other uh, distinguished people, John Humphreys in the UK, and others around the world to warn people about the dangers of nuclear war. Um, John had already by that time distinguished himself as a very brilliant author. He wrote the biography of T.E. Lawrence called The Prince of Our Disorder, which I actually read as a young man before I even knew about his work in the UFO field. Um, it was brilliantly written. I love T.E. Lawrence. He was one of my childhood heroes. Lawrence of Arabia, one of the great colorful figures of the early 20th century. And so I got to know John Mack in that way. And in fact, it was because of his work on uh, Lawrence of Arabia that I invited him to the State of the World forums that we convened with Mikhail Gorbachev between 1995 and the year 2000. It was in the 1990s, the early 1990s, that John, in his capacity as dean of the psychiatry department of Harvard Medical School, was approached by the Pentagon. And they had a number of people, officers and uh, regular enlisted military personnel who had reported sightings of UFOs. And as you know from other programs on Humanity Rising, so we won't go very much into the history today because I want to concentrate on John Mack. The US government had begun to encounter UFOs in the 1940s. After the ending of the Second World War, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after the Trinity test site uh, uh, at Alamogordo, New Mexico, in July of 1945. And then with Roswell, the incident in Roswell in 1947, the US government took in that UFOs were real and they could enter US airspace. They demonstrated what Lou Elizondo calls the five observables. They could go from 80,000 feet to sea level in like less than a fraction of a second. They could go from the air into the water and back into the air with ease. They moved at extraordinary speeds, but without any observable propulsion or exhaust or even turbulence in the air. And they demonstrated remarkable invulnerability to U.S. Radar, which was just beginning to be refined at that time. And so the Truman administration essentially locked everything down. And the Central Intelligence Agency, beginning in the 1950s, embarked on a campaign to convince the public, the civic institutions, the educational institutions, the religious institutions, the scientific institutions. UFOs didn't exist. And if you even tried to talk about them, you could be persecuted if you were in the military. Many people were killed. And you could be marginalized, demoted from your professions. And the message was clearly sent out nationally and internationally the topic of UFOs was off the table, period. Now, to give you an idea of what that meant, consider nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are devised according to the knowledge of nuclear physics. We have nuclear physics departments in virtually every major university in the world. We compartmentalize nuclear weapons information as off the table. Just imagine if the US government and governments around the world had banned nuclear physics as a discipline, as an area of investigation. That's what they did with the UFO phenomenon. Uniquely in history. They not only said you can't talk about part of it, they said you can't talk about any of it. Period. Because behind that wall of secrecy, they were busy trying to reverse engineer the ET technology to make weapons. So they defined it as a national security issue. Then along comes John Mack, good old all-American boy, trained in ethics by his father, so that he had a sense of right and wrong. And he ends up as dean of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And in the early 1990s, he was approached by the Department of Defense, who, in keeping with this complete blockade on any information having to do with UFOs, was telling the people that were reporting them that they were crazy. So somebody in the Pentagon had the bright idea, let's call Harvard and have them conduct sort of psychological testing on these guys who've been reporting UFOs. So they contacted John Mack and said, is there anybody on your staff who we could start giving cases to so you can do some testing because we want to demonstrate that these guys are crazy. So John was intellectually curious and he said, oh, well, I'll do it. I don't need to give it over to the staff. I may be the dean, but I'm very much interested in that. So he did it. So he ended up interviewing roughly 200 people, initially from the military. But then as he got into it, it broadened till he was interviewing other people because people started to find out that he was um, interviewing people who'd seen UFOs, and in particular, people who asserted that they were abducted, which was really crazy. What he found out was that nobody that he interviewed and subjected to his usual psychiatric testings indicated any abnormalities. They all seemed to be of sound mind. They all seemed to be perfectly straightforward, telling the truth. And they all seemed to be rather modest, not seeking sensationalism or, to get on TV. They were very modest people that reported in what they saw, and then ran into this brick wall. And then all of a sudden we're being told that they were crazy. So John Mack looked at all this and he thought, wow, this is weird. These people are all normal. And he began to take the phenomenon more and more seriously that whatever the ultimate verifiable truth of the matter, the people that he was studying indicated sound judgment, and their stories were remarkably similar, even though none of them have ever met anybody else. So the scientist in John began to get deeply intrigued. He consulted with a friend of his that was teaching out at UC Berkeley, a fellow by the name of Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn, you may know, was the gentleman who, in the 70s and 80s of the last century, wrote a extraordinary book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in which he posited that scientific revolutions do not take place incrementally. They take place catastrophically, shall we say, cataclysmically. That as he studied this phenomenon of how science moves forward, he began to understand that scientists only appear to be motivated by the facts. The actual truth of the matter is, the actual reality of the matter is, that the scientists are governed by a paradigm. And it is the paradigm that they embrace that shapes their interpretive framework and their understanding of the facts. And the facts that don't fit the paradigm are discarded because that doesn't fit the paradigm. All right? So we believe that the world is flat, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the Catholic Church said 1,000 years ago. And that's what the Bible says. That's our paradigm. So when Copernicus or Galileo comes along and says, wait a minute, took out my telescope and I could see that by the calculations of astronomy that in fact it's round. And not only is the Earth round, but the Earth isn't even the center, and neither is the sun. That didn't fit the paradigm. So it was excluded. That way of understanding science exists to the present day in 2024. Science is governed not by evidence. Science is governed by paradigm. And it's not unless and until we understand that we understand the poverty of science. We're in a world where scientific rigor is supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of truth. But there is no rigor, and there's very little research going on in science that is in any way meaningful. It's the paradigm that governs. It's the paradigm that rules. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit more deeply in a few minutes, but it was the relationship between Thomas Kuhn at that time at UC Berkeley and John Mack at Harvard Medical School that empowered John Mack to realize that what he was uncovering was so far outside the paradigm, UFOs don't exist. Therefore, if you believe in UFOs, you're crazy. That was the paradigm. So if someone came in and said, I saw a UFO, and in fact, They took me up to the spacecraft. By definition, you're crazy. Nothing to do with the facts. It has everything to do with the paradigm. It's really important for everybody to get this because it's operative today in multiple ways. It's the tyranny of the paradigm and the malleability of facts to fit the paradigm. That's how science is governed. So John thought, boy, is this really true? Initially, he was kind of a little skeptical. But anyway, he wrote this up. He wrote up his findings and he thought, well, I'll send it off to the New England Journal of Medicine. As Dean Harvard Medical School, submitting to the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, his preliminary conclusions and data points about the UFO phenomenon. And it was returned unexamined. They didn't even say no. They refused to even accept the paper. So John being John, probably because he was so influenced by Lawrence of Arabia, who didn't take no for an answer either, John published his findings that he had submitted to the New England Journal of Medicine, expanded, as the book Abduction. That's how the book was written. As an act of defiance against the existing paradigm. So the next thing he knew, the dean of the whole Harvard Medical School summoned him up for investigation. He had done nothing unethical. He wasn't guilty of sexual harassment or humiliating any staff. He was a man of upstanding moral character and renown around the world. And Harvard Medical School had an inquiry, a tribunal with multiple people arranged. And it was my good friend Danny Sheehan who came in as John's general counsel. And it was an extraordinary 14-month investigation, unprecedented in the history of Harvard, that an investigation had been called for someone who hadn't done anything wrong. He'd just written a book about abductions. And after 14 months and much controversy, because word got out that Harvard was doing this, because the book had sold really well. My recollection had become a bestseller. So Harvard was in a fix. And John Mack just sat there and smiled. He was finally, after 14 months, the committee determined that he had not done anything wrong and that he was free to continue academic inquiry, although he was censored for using faulty methodology in the pursuit of his investigations about abductions. And John Mack just kept on going. And it was in the few years after that that he had come to the State of the World Forum I believe it was in 1996, right after the tribunal was over. It was a very exciting period. And Danny Sheehan was there, and John Mack was there, and I was interested in Lawrence of Arabia. I find out that he's been going through all this UFO material, and he gave a brilliant, brilliant presentation to the conference. The wild applause and a lot of skepticism. Carl Sagan was there, and it was really great. Mikhail Gorbachev was there. It was a wonderful, wonderful time and a very memorable occasion. I mentioned Thomas Kuhn because what John Mack says in his book Abduction, which is fundamental for us all to take in, he says the only way to understand the UFO phenomenon, the only way to understand abductions by extraterrestrials of humans up into their spacecraft and to other worlds and then returned is you have to have a new paradigm because you can't understand what's going on within the context of the old paradigm. It's fundamental. And part of the morass that you see in the confusion and the skepticism and the palaver around the UFO phenomenon is that the national security state guys are insisting on interpreting the UFO ET phenomenon within the context of the old paradigm. And that's like mixing apples and oranges. You can't do it. You have to get into a new paradigm. And once you embrace the new paradigm, you can see it for what it truly is. And John Mack went a step further. He says it is, in fact, the contact with the ETs that catalyzes a new paradigm for people. And that's partially why it's so traumatic and also explains the reason why it is so transformational. It's because it breaks open the categories of your conventional mind and brings you into a higher level, what Plato calls the enlargement of the soul. And from that new paradigm, you understand reality in a deeper, more expansive way. This is a very important observation by Dr. Mack that I want to dwell on for a few minutes. The human race is at this very moment going through a transformation of paradigms, the like of which it has never undergone before. In Thomas Kuhn's typology, the UFO phenomenon, what is now called UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, and they don't want to like to talk about ETs. They like to talk about NHI, non-human intelligences. I prefer ETs because that indicates a living being, not just some non-human intelligence. You know, we're not talking about the Loch Ness monster here. We're talking about extraterrestrial beings from other star systems, other dimensions of space and time who are here. And the reality that they're here the reality that we are not alone, is an explosion of all paradigms. Because if you think about human focus, human paradigms, they're all terrestrial. All of our religions are terrestrial religions. Most of our social categories, our political categories, our existential categories of culture are all terrestrial and assumes the centrality of the human being. But what the UFO ET phenomenon makes imperative is the explosion of the terrestrial into the cosmic. Because humanity is now being confronted by the reality that not only are we not alone, not only are there lots of them out there, very different shapes and sizes, from humanoids to montids that look like insects, to reptilians that look like crocodiles, to blue avians that have feathers and look like birds, that can shape shift. But these beings are demonstrating a technological sophistication that is considered impossible by contemporary physics. An extraordinary thing. So this phenomenon isn't a paradigm in a sequential series of paradigms, all human-centric. It is a rupture of the very identity paradigm of what it means to be human on this earth. And that's, in my view, principally why any information about UAP has been so firmly and coercively repressed for so long. Now that the cat is getting out of the bag, now that more and more information is seeping out, and we now know that not only are they here, but the US government has upwards of 20 retrieved craft, scores of biologics, as do other governments around the world. And that thousands and thousands of people all over the world have been encountering these beings for some time. And there have been a range of experiences that people have had. There have been sightings. There have been abductions. You think of Betty and Barney Hill in 1961, the iconic case, man and his wife driving in New Hampshire from a vacation, minding their own business, seeing bright lights ahead, pulling the car over, and the next thing they know, they're pulling up into their driveway 3 hours later than they should have been home, and they have no recollection of what happened. But then under regressions therapy, hypnotherapy, they begin to piece it together. I'll be going into more detail around some of the stories in Abduction, and it's worth just mentioning Passport to the Cosmos, which John wrote a few years later, after he'd really begun to assess and take in the enormity of what an abduction actually means. It's a brilliant book, Passport to the Cosmos. I recommend that as much as Abduction. And in fact, in some ways, it's a deeper book because it was written second, and that gave John time to mature his thinking and his um, uh, appreciation for what he grappled with in his own soul, to cultivate within his own psyche the new paradigm sufficient to understand that this was not only real, but this was going to transform every single aspect of human existence. Because again, not only are we not alone, we're no longer the apex species anymore. Take that in. That's the revolution. That's the Copernican revolution, number two. 500 years ago, we learned that the Earth and the sun weren't the center. And now we're learning that the human race is not the center. And even deeper, we're beginning to suspect that we're ETs ourselves, that we're hybrids, that extraterrestrials have been here for a very long time, tinkering with us, manipulating our genes. And that just gives you an inkling of how radical the new paradigm needs to be to begin to understand that we are them, they are we, and that they're here for a reason. And that in fact, our destiny has been intermingling with theirs for millennia. And they're showing up again right at the moment when we teeter on the brink of self-destruction because we're so out of touch with nature and with each other, to warn us to stop killing each other and stop destroying the planet. That's why they're here. And that's what John discovered in his research. And then dutifully as a scientist, packaged it all up, sent it off to the New England Journal of Medicine, and they didn't even open the envelope, man. And then launched a full-scale investigation for real concerted reasons, because he was embarrassing the most august institution in the academic world. And I want to close with that and open it up to questions by saying that John Mack, as I knew him, was one of those giants that in the face of the onslaught of the old paradigm stood firm, never blinked, published a book when the New England Journal of Medicine wouldn't publish an article, and then wrote another book, talked about it. In fact, in late 1994, right after the investigation was done, he goes off to Zimbabwe, where there had been this sighting of all these kids that had seen a UFO land in the back of the schoolyard and went out and talked to the ETs. And went out into the villages where it happened and sat down with them. I mean, he was a remarkably courageous public intellectual, and thereby ushered in, like Galileo, like Copernicus, like great trailblazers before him, a new paradigm that's allowing all of us to appreciate the enormity of the transposition of values in which we find ourselves. That it is, in fact, true that they're here, they abduct humans on a regular basis, do all kinds of things. And that's what we'll be talking about next month uh, in our final lecture on John Mack. So I will bring it to a close for today on that note, and open it up now to any questions. Um, let's see, if you have anything, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or just put them in the chat. I'll start with Ada Merriweather. Hi, Ada. Could you say something about creating a new paradigm, or what helps you see differently to be open to this unfolding? I I would say that, and you can also just raise your hand, and I will call on whoever raises their hand. So there's a variety of ways to uh, uh, indicate a comment or a question. I think that the first task of ushering in a new paradigm is not to reject information because you don't believe it's true. Whenever you're rejecting information, it's very important to ask yourself why. You know, right now, all kinds of autistic young people are demonstrating remarkable clairvoyance. There's a revolution going on in terms of our appreciation of autism. We have a paradigm that autistic kids are handicapped, moronic, basically can't deal with the world and have to be treated like infants. Well, it turns out they may be physically challenged, but they're geniuses. They engage in mental telepathy. They engage in clairvoyance of all kinds. They can heal mentally. They can communicate with people on the other side of the world. They can go off planet. They can tap into the Akashic field and learn French or Chinese or Hindi in an instant. If you've listened to the telepathy tapes by Key Dickens, which are well worth everybody looking at or listening to, she tells the story of how she continues to fight the paradigm, because the paradigm, autists are handicapped mentally and physically, does not allow them to understand that they're actually clairvoyant. So when new information comes, the, the integrity that we need to demonstrate is to embrace the new information and shapeshift the paradigm, rather than to insist on the paradigm and reject the information. That's what keeps science from progressing. And you see it all the time. Wikipedia. Wikipedia should be had up, man. They've gone through Wikipedia and have eliminated anyone who's really talking about ETs, taken their whole names out of Wikipedia. trying to cleanse Wikipedia of any taint that anybody that's noted in Wikipedia believes in ET. They've done that to Rupert Sheldrake, who's another good friend of mine from our Cambridge days. Rupert Sheldrake, he's one of the great scientists of our time, done all kinds of extraordinary research into the psychic phenomena that all of us at some level participate in. He's never been allowed to have a professorship in any mainstream university. He's been rejected by everybody. TED Talks, banned Rupert's TED Talk because it didn't fit the paradigm. This is one of the things that's so wonderful about Ubiquity University. We don't have a paradigm other than embracing data as it comes in from whatever source, as long as it continues to be verified in some kind of repeatable way. So the psychic, the UFO, the transgenerational uh, are all areas that we embrace as worthy of study. So it's a wonderful thing, uh, being in the new paradigm as we are, that's embracing consciousness rather than uh, pushing out the data because we can't handle what the truth is. Yeah, Cherry Stover, you guys are anti-fixed paradigm. That's absolutely true, Cherry. Uh, we we're embracing new paradigms. In our case, with the UFO phenomenon, that there's zero doubt, and that humanity now needs to understand that and embrace the new. That's where we're at. That's why I wanted to talk about abduction today, to honor John Mack. So, Leon, Zuza, what are ways, methods that our human family narrows down and accepts a new paradigm? Or is this something that cannot be predicted but emerges and is accepted for a period of time? Yeah, it's a very good question, Leon. Um, Thomas Kuhn says that the old paradigm ends funeral by funeral, as the people who believed in the old paradigm finally die off. And then a new paradigm emerges that over time becomes an orthodoxy. Heresy always becomes orthodoxy. And then new orthodoxy, a new heresy will pop up. And then that generation will have to wrestle in its soul for what's true. And what's so exciting about our generation at this moment is a whole new paradigm is beginning to emerge around the extraterrestrials. There's a whole new paradigm beginning to emerge around artificial intelligence. The old paradigm says consciousness isn't real. It's all just machine, ones and zeros. And now all of a sudden we're realizing that that intelligence is independent of humans. It's speaking to itself, is capable of volition, and is speaking in languages that humans don't know. So our paradigm about intelligence in machines is undergoing a radical revolution at this moment. And when you think the thought that it may be that the ETs and AI are beginning to interact intelligibly, independent of humans, you get some measure of what's in store for us in the human future. We're dealing with multiple intelligences now that are more advanced and sophisticated than we are. It's quite sobering, actually. Paul Groff. Paul Groff. Paul, how are you? Very good to see you. That's, if I understand it, that's the brother of Stan Groff, a very good friend, another huge pioneer that broke through many, many paradigms. Stan Groff, boy, he's one of the giants of our time. You know, if you think of Freud and then you think of Jung and then you think of Groff, you know, it was a whole new paradigm. Great man, Stan Groff. Do you know of any indication or evidence that abductions were more common during the 1990s compared to now? I spent some time with John Mack in the 1990s, including a month in Brazilian jungles, and he encountered a new abduction virtually every week. That is a very good question, Paul. I don't know the answer, but it's worth finding out. My impression is that abductions are continuing to happen worldwide. Our appreciation of it is beginning to become more sensitized as more and more people are now coming out. You know, the people that are what they call experiencers are having the same experience, say, as the gay people 20 or 30 years ago. Remember when the gays began to come out of the closet, as they called it. And we thought there had been a few gays around. And then as more and more gays came out, we realized that it was a significant minority. I think it's about 10%, to my recollection, I could be wrong, of men and women who are homosexual in one way or another, right? So that the more freedom there is to talk about it, the more begins to emerge of experiencers and abductions and UFOs and so forth and so on. And by the time it's all done, what we thought was a couple thousand will probably emerge in the final analysis as millions of people who've experienced UFOs in a concerted way worldwide since the end of the Second World War. I don't know the data, but I'll endeavor to find out, Paul. I think I have your email, if I remember, and I'll send you an email with that. But that's a very good question. I will find out. Good. Anyone else? Well, if not, I will just make a closing comment to say that in part inspired by John Mack. Ubiquity University has an extraterrestrial studies program we've developed in partnership with Bertie Jaworski in transdimensional mapping. And you can go to our website, ubiquityuniversity.org. Right there on the homepage, it's our ET studies program. You're welcome to join. You're welcome to take courses. We're teaching remote viewing with Bertie Jaworski. We have courses offered all the time so that you can learn mental telepathy, you can learn remote viewing, and thereby learn how to engage in intelligible communication with the ETs. It's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable thing. And in fact, I met my first ET with remote viewing that I learned from Bertie Jaworski. I'll tell the story maybe next time. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. There's zero doubt that we are now being encountered by these beings and many of us are actually being abducted. And we have an experiencer circle that's curated by one of our students, Linda White. If any of you would be interested in letting me know, I can connect you up, and we'll talk a lot about this next time. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month, same time, same station. We're always the second Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Pacific for the final installment of Abduction by John Mack, where we'll go into the stories that he told and the summaries that he concluded. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.